Hello, we are transmitting to you from our present, which we can only assume is your distant past, the turbulent time that was the early 21st century. Fearing the great cataclysm that will surely befall our civilization, we began this monumental reference of strange and obscure human knowledge. These recordings represent our attempt to compile and preserve wonders and esoterica that would otherwise be lost. Whether you're listening from an advanced civilization or have just reinvented the technology to decrypt our transmissions, this is our legacy to you. This is our time capsule. This is the Omnibus.
You have accessed entry 319.MA0605, certificate number 44697, the death of Mr. McMahon.
You know what? The only ones who are going to tell me when I'm through doing my thing is you people here.
Hello, Nick. Welcome to the Omnibus Project.
John, how are you? It's a pleasure to be here. Pleasure to be joining you.
I'm doing well. I'm recording here in the bunker, and as per our discussion on the Get to Know Nick Butler episode, you are calling in from Albany, New York, the capital of the great state of New York.
Yes, beautiful upstate New York, here in Albany by way of Binghamton, New York, where I was born and raised, and then ended up coming up here in 2011 or so for college. And other than a brief stint down in D.C., found my way right back here.
You know, Albany it was always a confusing place to me because growing up, I thought of it as, I mean, I'm in Alaska, so who were we to talk? But I always thought of Albany as like really like a gray backwater, literally up the river, like where
Sure.
the brackish water probably ends, and it just is, gray river water.
Yeah.
But when I visited Albany, it's an odd mixture of, yes, definitely that, but also there's a lot of modern kind of cool Albany. Albany seems to have a handful of identities.
Yeah, well, Governor Rockefeller in the 60s sort of mowed down a handful of neighborhoods to put in the New York State Plaza.
As was the style of the time.
Yes, and so I know, unless you were part of those, I believe, predominantly Greek neighborhoods, you might enjoy the architecture, the sort of brutalist 60s architecture that Albany has deployed, which, of course, features the legendary egg, which has been, I think, mentioned maybe in The Simpsons. In Albany is as well the home of steamed hams from The Simpsons.
The home of steamed hams.
That's right.
Yeah. The brutalism in Albany, it really is. It's not quite Brasilia level, but you really do feel like you're in a decaying spaceport on the edge of the Dagobah system.
It's very efficient. There are a lot of tunnels to move things around, and it sort of matches the style of politics that we have here, or at least have had for a long period of time.
Yeah.
Different avenues for people to sneak around and end up in rooms and do some hobnobbing and wheeling and dealing. I very much enjoyed Albany. The first time I actually ever came up to Albany was for a WWE show in 2006, I came up for the pay-per-view New Year's Revolution.
For those who are listening in foreign countries or in West Coast,
unless Saudi
cities,
Arabia, in which case they're well aware.
You're referring to professional wrestling, a large professional wrestling event.
That's right.
Who were the stars? Who were the stars of that show?
So that episode, that pay-per-view, this is a Sunday night pay-per-view. You had to pay to watch it. Me, my dad, my friend John, went to this, and the main event of this pay-per-view was an elimination chamber.
Oh.
And so it's this gigantic metal structure that they lower on down to the ring.
Right.
And it starts with two wrestlers in the ring, facing off, but in each of the corners, behind the turnbuckles, there are wrestlers in clear glass cages that are one by one released into the elimination chamber. And then one by one are pinned and released from the elimination chamber. They are eliminated.
Right.
And so this was, as you can imagine, for a 13-year-old Nick Butler who loved the wrestling, the World Wrestling Entertainment. This was quite the spectacle. This was really the sort of best case scenario. And the match ended. It came down to John Cena, who recently retired from World Wrestling Entertainment, and another wrestler, I'm not exactly sure who. John Cena pinned and won the title belt. It was for the WWE Championship. And then actually the subject of this episode, Mr. McMahon, his music hit in the arena, and he walks out and he says, "Hold everything. This gentleman has decided to cash in his Money in the Bank his Money in the Bank briefcase. Ladies and gentlemen, Edge." And then the wrestler Edge came out. He sprinted down into the ring, and John Cena had just been through the elimination chamber. He's bleeding, and he's really in bad shape right now.
Right. You would think that he was done. He had done his work, and now it was time for him to...
Edge is challenging him. He says, "I'm cashing in this Money in the Bank. I'm taking my opportunity." He had it almost for a year by that point, so it was a real surprise, and delivered 2 spears to John Cena, and ultimately Edge was victorious that night.
But John Cena is so handsome he's a movie star even.
And he was the real hero of this era of professional wrestling, which is sort of known as the ruthless aggression era of professional wrestling. And he was the star during this period of time.
So I've been to 2 professional wrestling matches. One of them was on Thanksgiving Day in 1986 when I was 17 years old. No, I had just turned 18 years old.
Sure.
And I was in Minneapolis, and it was Thanksgiving, and I was given a ticket to a pro wrestling match, and I went to Kentucky Fried Chicken and got a box of chicken and then, ate it at the wrestling match. It's one of my foundation events. It made me the man I am today. The first real holiday I spent away from my family.
Sure.
It really cemented what aloneness feels like.
Sure.
And then very recently, I went to a wrestling match with erstwhile co-host of the Omnibus Project, Ken Jennings.
Really?
We were invited because someone in professional wrestling is a fan. Yeah. And we went, and not only did we, get very good seats to watch the match, but then we were invited backstage and spent a whole hour backstage taking pictures with the wrestlers and, and going through the costumes and having, confidential encounters. It was really it was an eye opener.
Yeah, you were taken behind the kayfabe. You saw the other side of it.
You may be surprised to learn they're all good friends backstage.
No.
There's lots of hugging. Everybody's just...
John, I will say many of them are good friends.
Oh, okay, that's right. Yeah, there's probably some actual rivalries, but I was surprised at how friendly and and sweet, and it kind of smelled like lavender. It was really very different from how dangerous it feels out in the crowd.
Well, it's well established that the professional wrestling is a kind of soap opera for men. A way for men to follow the same characters over a long period of time. And as Ken pointed out in a previous Omnibus entry that included professional wrestling, Farmer Burns, it is also the home of a significant amount of homoeroticism.
Yes, which now has been transferred over to hockey by...
that's right, yes. Heated Rivalry.
Heated Rivalry has now made hockey the homoerotic... focus, I think, for a lot of people. Yep. And as somebody who periodically attends a hockey game, I haven't been to a hockey game since Heated Rivalry became a national fascination. So I'm really intrigued to see how the demographic has changed at the games.
You're going to be going, the next time you go, you'll be going to your very first hockey match featuring a boy aquarium.
A boy aquarium! That's precisely what it was.
Yes.
Yeah, the era of gladiatorial combat has changed because, of course, gladiatorial combat was always a boy aquarium of a kind.
That's right. And a kind of homoeroticism. So it really had, of course, well established throughout time how these things manifest.
So when you were 13, were you aware of the kayfabe? At what age did your fandom of professional wrestling include the suspension of disbelief?
I don't, the truth be told, I don't know that I fully ever thought it was real. In that I don't know that I ever really thought the storylines I was watching play out were fully happening. But it didn't seem that strange to me to watch a show and pretend it was real. I mean, that's kind of every television show, right?
Sure.
I watch Law and Order, and I don't just sit there and go, well, this is all scripted.
Yeah.
It would be sort of a strange way to consume media.
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
So, I don't really recall ever having thought that it was real. But, I was very much of the sentiment that it wasn't entirely fake either. You can't fake jumping off and onto people, and those mats are pretty hard. And, even elements of wrestling that are fake, like when, let's say, the wrestler would bleed in that era, particularly the Attitude Era, they were putting small incisions into their forehead that would then sort of mix with their sweat, and it would really they'd look like they were bleeding profusely, and often the times they were. Right. And there were some wrestlers, Ric Flair, for example, was sort of famous. If you watched a Ric Flair match, and knowing Ric Flair, there might be another opportunity here at any given moment for him to wrestle. He's probably in his 80s now, 70s, 80s. But every time he would wrestle, without fail, he'd just start bleeding everywhere. And, he's sort of famous for cutting promos where he would hit himself in the head 2 or 3 times and just start bleeding. So he had perfected this method, over a period of time and could make it happen on a spot. So I never thought it was necessarily real. But I very much enjoyed it. And 13-year-old me was really into this. I mean, I really loved wrestling. It was a way to engage with them, sort of immersive storylines, right? You get to see your heroes over and over, defeat the bad guys. Sometimes the bad guy wins. And there was always this sense I had, at least, because you always want the good guy to win, and that doesn't always happen, that I could maybe do a better job than they were at putting together this show that
Now, what do you mean, as a producer or as a wrestler?
I mean as a 13-year-old kind of producer writer, I was very anxious. I would look at WWE.com for jobs, and I'd go, if they only knew what I could bring to the table.
Right.
And so, in lieu of that, I started my own backyard wrestling company with my friends.
Oh my goodness!
So
rather than jump over garbage cans on your BMX bike, you were staging wrestling matches.
We were throwing garbage cans at one another.
Yeah.
Yes. And so, it was BWE, Backyard Wrestling Entertainment. It took place in my backyard in Binghamton, New York, on a trampoline. We did a version of wrestling that was even one further layer removed. We're not hitting each other. We're not, open fist. We're not doing any of that. We're just sort of, the whole trick was know where the camera is, because we're filming this on the old DVR or whatever type camera.
A lot of, the punches into the hand.
Into the hand, right? Where actual wrestlers, and I learned this the hard way when a year or two later, a friend of mine who trained to become an amateur professional wrestler and knew I had done some of that in my backyard, but maybe misconstrued what kind of amateur professional wrestling I was doing, hit me with an open hand. Like, you kind of stop short, but you're still getting slapped, basically. Yeah. So I was like, what did you hit me for? And he goes, so that's how you, and I go, well, no, I don't. I was just getting the camera angle and doing the, the fist into the hand.
This is a perfect example of the cultural difference between Generation X and the millennials, because of course, by the time I was 20 years old, I'd been punched 14 different times, whereas you probably had never been punched by
one single
anybody.
time, which was my, I called the guy Chief. He says, don't do that again. I said, all right, Chief.
Wham. Now, let me ask you, Nick, it's interesting because, as you said, I think, and it never occurred to me quite this way, wrestling is no more or less fictional than Law and Order or any other script. And
in fact, it can interact with the real world. I thought that was pretty cool.
And all of the Bachelor and Bachelorette shows are probably at least as scripted as wrestling.
Sure.
But why do you think it is that wrestling is treated differently culturally? Like people feel like they need to expose it as fake, and they need to kind of hold wrestling fans as a separate group of dupes.
Well, John, I think you're describing the laptop liberal class.
Oh, I see. But this existed a long time before laptops,
of course,
right?
Yeah, I don't know that there was certainly a period of time where wrestling was thought as maybe, they were getting it over, right? People thought this was really happening. It was originally really happening, and then they kind of shifted it. And then kayfabe in the 80s, 1980s, and sort of the golden era, was very strictly held on. And so in that era, I think more people probably really thought wrestling was real to some extent. And, to the point where if wrestlers who were enemies with one another would be seen together, they would get in trouble with the company. It was a real big, you weren't supposed to break kayfabe. I think that that definitely started to shift in the 90s. I mean, I think probably the persistence of people to sort of want to expose that, and which, I guess if people were really falling for it, probably good that we make clear, these aren't really enemies. Like, stop investing so much of your energy into what's really happening, and instead engage with it in a way that you're suspending your disbelief, in an active way. And, maybe in the same way that, we treat Santa, like there might be a period of time for younger children to mature into the larger picture of the thing. But for the most part now, I mean, again, I really don't remember ever thinking, though, this is really happening. Right. I was always pretty sure it was a show.
In rock and roll, there's a lot of myth making and a lot of, for lack of a better term, kayfabe.
Sure.
Even the most decadent rock musician spends 23 and a half hours of the day being bored out of their minds. And then, they put, or let's say 22 hours of the day. And then they put on their giant headdress or whatever, and they go out and they have 2 hours where they're really, really, really the almost mythological creatures, right? And we buy it. I mean, we believe that Keith Richards is taking a bath in adrenochrome, when in fact, Keith Richards is probably trying to figure out how to operate his Keurig in his hotel room, and like, where's the button, and there are so many areas of contemporary culture where the kayfabe is accepted as true and really never questioned.
Yes.
Politics, of course, being another one, and even the military in a lot of ways.
Yeah, politics certainly is maybe the primary example, and I'd love to talk a little bit about that as we work through this story, because certainly when I was a fan of professional wrestling back in the day, there was no overlap necessarily with politics. And my professional wrestling fandom actually became, in 2008 with Barack Obama running for office. I was 15 years old. I sort of shifted my attention from this scripted professional wrestling to American politics, and followed it in earnest, meaning I didn't think of it as this world of kayfabe. And over time, particularly in the last 10, now 11 years, there has been, a real shift that's occurred in terms of how kayfabe has impacted politics. And I think it's interesting because it probably was occurring when I was 15 years old and Barack Obama was running for office, but it was a different kind of environment. But professional wrestling and politics have come to merge in many ways in our real era time now.
Certainly aesthetically they have, like...
Hulk Hogan was at the Republican National Convention about a week before the 2024 election. Donald Trump walked out to The Undertaker's music at a rally wearing a long, dark, sort of cloaked vest. And Donald Trump will play a role in our story today as we talk through this era of wrestling in 2007. He was one of the characters, and we'll be talking about him in his role or his capacity as a WWE Hall of Famer.
Well, when I think back to my own era, Rowdy Roddy Piper did save us from an alien invasion. He did expose, a kind of like a colonization of Earth. So there's always been an element of politics and exposure of the deep state.
Sure. Yeah, it definitely interacts. And John, as I get started in this story, I do want to go through maybe a series of content warnings and disclosures, just as we have this discussion. As the title indicates, we'll be talking about death. We will also be talking a little bit about some tragedies that include suicide. Additionally, we'll be talking about Mr. McMahon, who in real life is known as Vince McMahon. By all accounts, not a good guy. In fact, by all accounts, probably a very bad guy. From 2006 to 2022, he paid nearly $20 million in hush money payments for sexual misconduct, which he was fined by the FEC for. He is currently under federal investigation for sex trafficking, sexual assault, and other alleged crimes, which, of course, makes him a prime candidate for a potential presidential pardon. And his estranged wife, Linda, is the Secretary of Education.
Wow. Well, I think of Vince McMahon primarily as the subject of some hilarious memes. The meme where he's crying and doesn't want to talk anymore. The meme where his mind is blown and he falls back and can't believe whatever series of 4 panels that he's been exposed to. But I remember when Vince McMahon first appeared on the scene. It was a long time ago. When did he get his start in wrestling?
So I believe he's starting in maybe in the late 80s, early 90s. He purchases the company WWF. There might have been another W in there at the time from his dad, and he begins to consolidate the different regional entities that exist for professional wrestling, and has this vision: we're going to make one professional wrestling company to rule them all.
Did his dad start the WWF?
He did. I really think it was the WWF. But
I think I remember that too. WWF. The worldwide, wise, wiggly, wrestling wabbits.
Yes. So his dad did start that, and there were a number of other companies operating throughout the 70s, 80s, 90s. And then Vince really starts to consolidate those. And you sort of end up with a handful of companies left in the 90s, including WCW, Ted Turner's wrestling company, and ECW, which is sort of a more independent company operating at the time. Ultimately, Vince and the WWE consolidate those companies, take them over as well. They all fold into the WWE.
And so now, is there only one? Is wrestling like Major League Baseball? There's really only one league?
There's certainly WWE is by far I would say the largest. There are smaller brands, and so AEW is going to be a smaller brand that's on television. I think TNA is maybe still operating today, and then there are also regional amateur professional wrestling companies that are still operating. And so my friend who, smacked me in the face, he continued on in that trajectory and was involved in Binghamton's sort of amateur professional wrestling circuit. And so it continues to sort of operate. And in fact, I think it's important to stress that the wrestling community largely, despite Vince McMahon, the person, is often a very welcoming community, and it is a place where you can utilize your imagination. You can create spaces for competition that is sort of is lighter than maybe the let's say the UFC is operating on, and so
right. Women's wrestling is a big deal, and wrestling now is much more integrated than it was when I mean it's pretty diverse, right?
That's right, and. We've I think come a long way since the 90s and the period of time that we'll be talking about today, 2007, when there was this transition from what was known as the Attitude Era in the late 90s, and we kind of bring ourselves in today. We're at sort of the PG era. I would say we're really, the WWE today is operating in a corporate era. So Vince McMahon, who was still owned the company as recently as 2 years ago, sold it to another company, the same company that runs UFC. And so now they're consolidated under one brand. And they operate as a sort of publicly traded company, which is very strange to see. And even during this story in 2007, they were operating as a publicly traded company, but hadn't completed the transition yet. So it was all the strange stuff was still happening. But I guess people weren't paying attention. It's really not clear necessarily.
The thing is that publicly traded companies at that time were just across the board, generally like, in some respects, according to contemporary standards, would have been described as ungoverned.
Yes.
A lot of things just weren't considered part of the corporate oversight that now really would be.
Yeah. So we will start this story in 2007. You have a 14-year-old Nick Butler. He's got his own backyard wrestling company who, my character was named Rick Vincey. Rick after Ric Flair. Vincey after a substitute teacher in my school, Mr. Vincey. Thought he had a cool name. Mm-hmm. So slap that on there. And my character was very much, at this 14-year-old age, inspired by Mr. McMahon, Donald Trump, a little bit of Stone Cold Steve Austin in there. Yeah. So I was wrestling as a heel, a bad guy. I would offer to pay my opponent to lay down, and I would just pin him and get it over with. Sort of these sorts of tricks. Screw people over out of the title belt. The whole thing. We're really having some fun. And throughout 2007, Donald Trump starts making appearances in World Wrestling Entertainment. So he is appearing on Monday Night Raw, and he is challenging Mr. McMahon, sort of in a competition of wealth is how it really manifests itself. And they go back and forth, and they're, sort of exchanging insults to one another.
He never appears in the ring. He never is trying to be part of the violence. But
he's in the ring. I mean, he's standing in the ring. He's got his trench coat on. For some reason, he was always wearing this long coat, which he still does, these days.
Yeah, the duster was for sure a moment in time.
And so there's this clip where they kind of settle in and agree that they're going to have a battle of the billionaires at WrestleMania 23. This battle of the billionaires, to your point, John, Donald Trump is not going to wrestle Vince McMahon.
Right.
And Mr. McMahon, as a character, does wrestle sometimes. He would enter the ring. He would fight. But
he's buff, right? Did he start as a wrestler, or did he just get buff in the boardroom?
So, it's so interesting because with the background, you don't know what to believe with these people. But the story is Vince always wanted to be a wrestler, and his dad wouldn't let him. So he bought the company and kind of let himself be a wrestler is kind of part of that mythology. But yes, he was very buff. And then kind of when I was a kid he was on, I think, Men's Health magazine, really just, showing off his muscles. But because Vince and Donald Trump were not going to wrestle one another, they each elected to have a wrestler fight on their behalf in a hair versus hair match.
Oh, so they had proxies? They had
proxies. Vince McMahon selected Umaga, was his wrestler, who would be fighting on his behalf at WrestleMania 23. And Donald Trump selected Bobby Lashley, would be wrestling on his behalf. And the person who won would then have the opportunity to shave the hair of the other.
Oh, my God.
Either Vince would be shaving Donald Trump's hair, which no one thought was going to happen, or Donald Trump would be shaving Mr. McMahon's hair.
But now Umaga, just a quick look here, seems to be sort of New Zealand or Samoan coded. He's wearing Polynesian, what seem like fake Polynesian tattoos and some real Polynesian tattoos.
Yep, I believe Samoan. He comes from a wrestling family.
Oh, okay.
And I think he's passed away, but was a wrestler for a long time.
But that seems like a particularly sort of open-minded, I guess, of McMahon. He didn't just pick somebody that looks like him and was going to represent his rich hair.
He just wants the best guy.
Right.
He wants a big boy to go out there, fight on his behalf. And Bobby Lashley, if you were looking at Bobby Lashley, very equally is going to sort of have this massive frame. And at the time, it was really receiving a push by the company to potentially be a major superstar. They never necessarily broke through.
Hey, stop overpaying for wireless just because that's how it's always been. Mint Mobile exists purely to fix that. Mint Mobile is here to rescue us with premium wireless plans starting at $15 a month. All plans come with high-speed data and unlimited talk and text delivered on the nation's largest 5G network. You can bring your own phone and your own phone number, activate with eSIM in minutes, and start saving immediately. No long-term contracts, no hassle. Ditch overpriced wireless and get 3 months of premium wireless service from Mint Mobile for $15 a month. If you like your money, Mint Mobile is for you. Shop plans at mintmobile.com/omnibus. That's mintmobile.com/omnibus. Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month 5 GB plan required. Equivalent to $15 a month. New customer offer for first 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees are extra. See Mint Mobile for details. It does seem to me so Bobby Lashley is African American. So it just went from being not problematic to now being problematic again in the sense that these two rich white guys are having people of color fight their battles for them.
Well, don't worry, John, because Stone Cold Steve Austin was the special guest referee. So we had an arbiter who was there to step in if any shenanigans were to happen. He was keeping an eye on everything.
So not to spoil it, but I think it's pretty plain that if Donald Trump had his head shaved at this event, we would all know about it, and that picture would have really gone around the world. So that it feels kind of foreordained that Trump isn't going to lose this contest.
It really is one of those things, and this is where at the time I didn't necessarily think wrestling was real, but the way it plays mind games with you is I as a kid was thinking, well, there's no way Trump will lose, right? Like he won't lose, right? There's no way. They're not going to shave Donald Trump's hair. He's on The Apprentice. He's firing people,
right?
So you sort of knew, but you're like, well, what if? What if? And as the title of this episode is The Death of Mr. McMahon, of course, he is still alive. So we're going to talk through how that happens. But there are these storylines that move in sort of strange and interesting ways. So you're absolutely right. It didn't seem ever possible that Donald Trump was going to lose this match at WrestleMania, or rather Bobby Lashley on his behalf was never going to lose this match. So we get to WrestleMania 23, appropriately takes place on April Fool's Day, 2007.
Mm-hmm.
And
do you remember where you were on April? Well, you were probably glued to the television.
I was glued to the television. I was sitting in my home in Binghamton, watching with bated breath as my two unfortunate heroes. Vince McMahon, to my senses, was always maybe a bad guy. Like I don't know, even a sense as a kid, you kind of knew. And perhaps that's my stunted Catholic upbringing, but I thought it was very strange when Vince McMahon would be in the middle of the ring and make his employees, professional wrestlers, men and women, literally kiss his.
Yeah. Oh, really? They would have to bend down and plant one on his butt.
Yes, there was the Vince McMahon Kiss Ass Club, and
That's
it was
terrible.
It really is. It really is really awful. The whole arc of this is terrible. I mean, and unfortunately, when I say the whole arc, I mean through today. It has continued. Professional wrestling is obviously tame, but unfortunately, it's manifested itself into our shared reality in some ways.
Right.
This kind of behavior. So
now I just looked this up here on my computer, and April 1st, 2007, I was actually in New York City with my band. And there's a photograph of us taken on that day, so I know exactly where I was too.
Wonderful.
Yeah, maybe I'll find a way to include that photo as part of the supplementary material for the show.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So anyway, so here's the big event, and I'm blissfully unaware of it in my own timeline.
Sure. So they head out there. It's Donald Trump and Vince McMahon, who are sort of around the aprons as the wrestling match is happening in the ring. Stone Cold is, of course, the guest referee. There's an instance where maybe Stone Cold gets knocked out somehow, and Shane McMahon, Vince McMahon's son, comes out and tries to be his own special referee. So there's some shenanigans happening. There's also, as the match is happening, a moment where Donald Trump does clothesline Vince McMahon on the side of the ring. And
was it convincing?
No. No. It was Donald Trump clotheslining Vince McMahon, but it is a kind of sound barrier to watch this clothesline happen. And a real life guy enters that world and does something. So, and it's funny, right? Like it is funny. Like it wasn't just, oh my God, it was like hilarious that it was happening.
Are there other examples of real life people who entered into the pro wrestling space as their own selves, kind of like making a cameo on Saturday Night Live as themselves? Are there other examples of this?
Yeah, it does happen throughout. In fact, right now in this corporate era, it is happening often in WWE to an extent that it's probably ruining the product. And I'm no longer, I maybe should clarify, I'm no longer a fan. I haven't been a fan for maybe, since I went to college. But it is one of those things where you do kind of just keep an eye on it, see what's happening, maybe check who's the champion, what's going on, where's the company at.
So you're saying that Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos are like stopping by WWE to get on TV?
A little later in this entry, we'll talk through a number of cameos that occur in a single episode of Monday Night Raw. But, throughout the years, I think Drew Carey one time entered the WWE Royal Rumble.
I'll accept that.
So he went out, entered the ring, and I believe he self-eliminated. So I think he made himself go over the top rope after maybe Kane, Kane, I think, came out to wrestle him.
And he's like, no, he ran and like skipped bail.
Yeah.
Okay, I get it.
Yeah. So there's, it's almost always done in a sort of humorous way. But the Trump thing was not directly a humorous thing. I mean, there were things where Donald Trump just, let me put that in air quotes, Donald Trump, which is very important to recognize that, the things that these people are doing often are not actually themselves. But anyway, they said he released money into an arena and so all this money starts falling into the arena, and all the fans are picking it up. And, it's this big moment where, I don't know, he's making people's dreams come true.
Right. But it's AC/DC bucks. It's not like actual dollars.
I think it was real money, though. That was actually some real money. Yeah. Whether it was ones and fives, who's to say?
Sure.
So this wrestling match is going on at WrestleMania 23, and ultimately, as we discussed, Bobby Lashley prevails on behalf of Vince McMahon. And so they take and restrain Vince in the middle of the ring. It's Stone Cold, Bobby Lashley, and Donald Trump kind of holding him down. And Donald Trump takes a razor, an electric razor, and comes right down Vince's head and kind of starts shaving his head right there in WrestleMania.
So Bobby Lashley won on behalf of Trump, and now McMahon is getting shaved.
That's right.
Just his head, though. They're not like gonna just shave him completely, because that would be
just his head. Yeah, they've got the electric razor going, and McMahon at the time had a sort of a big hair, big kind of haircut too. So it was a seemingly important thing that was happening, I guess. They cover his head in a bunch of shaving cream and start shaving his head, and so it's a real treat. And again, 14-year-old Nick wouldn't trade it for the world.
No, of course. This is big. I can see this. And, Vince owns the company, so this is, it's a small price to pay for what were surely some pay-per-view dollars.
And so after the shaving happens, then John Stone Cold gives Donald Trump a can of beer. And they cheer, right? They do a quick cheers.
Right.
And there's, if you're a professional wrestling fan, you would know if Stone Cold's handing you a beer and offering to drink it with you, he's about to hit you with the stunner.
Oh,
and so,
this is one of his tricks.
You're sort of watching, as a 14-year-old Nick is watching, thinking, he's not going to take, Donald Trump isn't about to take a stunner.
Tell us what a stunner is.
He kicks you in the stomach. He spins around, grabs you, your head, and then drops.
Oh my God.
So kick in the stomach, spin around, grab head, drop, and the drop stuns you, and you fall back. So, sure enough, Stone Cold kicks Donald Trump, there were air quotes there, in the gut, and proceeds to deliver a Stone Cold stunner. Equally as convincing as the clothesline was, which means Vince McMahon did not sell it very well. Sorry, Donald Trump. Donald Trump did not sell it very well.
Was Trump a heel or a hero?
He was, because Vince is such, Mr. McMahon as a character is such a heel, and Donald Trump was dropping money on the fans, he was coming across as like an anti-hero kind of character.
Mm-hmm.
He wasn't,
he's the Batman.
Because he was going after Mr. McMahon, he was kind of coming across as a face, though not quite all the way.
Right.
So now Vince McMahon is bald, WrestleMania ends, and we enter this period of time between WrestleMania 23 and the show we'll be talking about, Mr. McMahon Appreciation Night. Vince McMahon enters an era known as Do-Rag Vince. So there's a period of time where he tries a fedora, he tries a bowler hat when they're in the United Kingdom, but he ultimately ends up in a do-rag, and this is as problematic as you would expect.
When you say do-rag, you literally mean like it's very African-American coded, silky do-rag with the long tail.
Yep.
There's nothing about it that doesn't read as what a millennial would describe as cultural appropriation.
He is full on wearing a do-rag, purple silk do-rag, black do-rag. He's saying things like gee and Holmes.
Wow. So he's embracing it as like a new identity. He's
talking in what Wikipedia describes as street style.
Right. Yo, yo, yo. What's up, homie?
And once again, I'll say 14-year-old Nick, unfortunately, is sort of like, well, this is such an absurdist kind of humor. Again, I think there's through a lot of this, there's this underlying sentiment beneath the humor where you're like, I think this is bad, but this above it is the absurdist humor. So you go, well, it's pretty funny.
What we're talking about here is between 2008 and 2015, what we would describe as humor changed a lot. And in 2008, this would have been absurd. It would have been transgressive, but in a way that was mild and funny and whatever. And by 2015, this would have been offensive and it would have been censorious.
Yeah.
So I'm going to blanket forgive you as a 14-year-old for not condemning this and protesting it.
Well, thank you, John. That I will sleep easier tonight. That's been a heavy burden to be carrying all these years. So I do appreciate that. In this period of time, Do-Rag Vince goes on to win the ECW championship, which is a real, sort of a slap in the face of real professional wrestling fans. And I feel comfortable saying that. ECW fans who, that's a previous company that Vince absorbed. And so it's a real slap in the face for those fans to watch Mr. McMahon, Vince McMahon, assume the championship belt.
Wait, you mean he suited up, he put on a leotard and went out and did enough actual wrestling that he claimed to have won the belt?
He has done a lot of wrestling throughout the years. I believe this match was maybe some kind of a four-way, and it was whoever got the pin, and he was fighting alongside his son Shane McMahon, who, Shane kind of did all the work and said, "Get over here, Dad," and sort of, real allegory to most of what's been happening. maybe except for maybe reversed.
Uh-huh.
So he's ECW champion, and he's behaving erratically, absurdly in this way that's way over the top. And come June 2007, Do-Rag Vince loses the ECW championship. And when he loses the ECW championship, he becomes even further unmoored from reality. He begins behaving very meekly, feebly, quiet, dejected, and sort of just very quiet. And it's uncharacteristic for Mr. McMahon, who's this very boastful, big personality. He really seemed to sort of take this in a very hard way.
And is this also kayfabe? Is this leading up to something?
This is all kayfabe. And in fact, on June 3rd, 1 week before Mr. McMahon Appreciation Night, which is the main subject of this show, he mentions that he had a premonition. And they don't really say much more about that, just that he has a premonition, and you sort of assume that's maybe why he's acting in this strange and bizarre way.
Let me ask you something formally about wrestling. There's only one Super Bowl. There's only one World Series. But it feels like a championship belt is at stake multiple times, kind of randomly. Like, it's not just at the end of the year there's a championship wrestling match, but those belts seem to come out all the time and trade hands. Is that true?
Yeah, so every month there's going to be a pay-per-view. That's mostly where certainly the world championships are going to be changing hands, usually at the pay-per-view. It's very rare if you're watching Monday Night Raw, let's say, or SmackDown, for a WWE championship to change hands. The tag team titles, Intercontinental title, those are going to change hands on those shows, give the people who attend something to watch. But very rare that the World Heavyweight Championship is going to change hands on a Monday night episode, which does, you think about that. That means if a main event is for the championship, you just kind of know what the outcome is, because it's just not going to change hands.
So that's good background.
So he has this premonition in the beginning of June 2007. And on June 11th, 2007, there is a special 3-hour episode of Monday Night Raw. It's usually only 2 hours. This is a 3-hour episode. It's a draft. So the rosters of Raw and SmackDown, which are the two distinct brands in the WWE, they're separated. And what a draft allows is the superstars to move from one another and potentially change which show they're wrestling on.
Oh.
In addition to Raw and SmackDown, this draft included ECW, which the WWE had recently acquired and was incorporating into the show. June 11th, 14-year-old Nick Butler got into a car with his dad and his friend John and drove from Binghamton, New York, down to Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, to attend this 3-hour Monday Night Raw, and to see this draft and to see what would become known as Mr. McMahon Appreciation Night.
And how much does it cost to actually go to one of these?
Yeah, so we were sitting up the upper decks, and let's say very similarly, maybe at the time, $30 a ticket, $50 a ticket, kind of in that range. Certainly cheaper than I'm sure that it is now.
And had you attended a ton of wrestling matches in person prior?
I had been to a few. I mentioned the Elimination Chamber match. I had been to a show in Binghamton, New York as well in 2005 where Stone Cold made an appearance, which was a really big deal for me. So I had been a few times to these live shows, including what's known as a house show, which is a show that does not air on television. It's just for the people in usually a smaller town, such as Binghamton.
Is this like NASCAR where the circuit is Binghamton and Wilkes-Barre and, like towns that are not major population centers, but they are part of a circuit? Because I don't remember wrestling coming to Seattle, for instance, very often.
Yeah, I think probably in this era, late Attitude Era, early Ruthless Aggression era, WWE is definitely going through and hitting these smaller towns for those house shows. And then the main shows, SmackDown and Raw, as well as the pay-per-views, are maybe in a slightly larger city, but still sometimes occasionally in those smaller towns.
Right. Okay. Got it. All right. You've set the stage.
So we enter Mr. McMahon Appreciation Night, and Monday Night Raw begins. It opens with Mr. McMahon holding a piece of paper and, again, still acting very feebly, very quiet. And he says, tonight is going to be Mr. McMahon Appreciation Night. He says, there's been a lot of concern about him. Don't worry, everything's fine. But he's reading this all very dejected, and it's very strange. It's just a very strange thing.
He's reading this about himself?
Yes, it's a very odd sequence that's occurring. Okay. And this is all following Do-Rag Vince. So as you can imagine, it's just a strange kind of storyline to be following. I'll just sort of say what the card of the show was to give you an idea of the names we're dealing with and for any professional wrestling fans. But the show opens with John Cena versus Edge. That's a pretty good match, actually, at the time. Edge wins by countout, which wasn't necessarily surprising because they were both WWE champions, and you don't really want to put one over the other. You then have CM Punk versus Carlito. CM Punk is victorious. Umaga is victorious over Balls Mahoney.
Balls?
Mahoney, yes.
Balls Mahoney.
Balls Mahoney.
Okay, all right. I'll accept that.
Bobby Lashley is victorious over Chris Benoit. MVP is victorious over Santino Marella. And as these matches are happening, each one of these wrestlers is representing a different show. So either Raw, SmackDown, or ECW. The winner determines the draft pick. So if a Raw wrestler wins, a draft pick goes to Raw. If a SmackDown wrestler wins, a draft pick goes to SmackDown.
I see.
The Miz wins against Snitsky. Candice Michelle wins against Crystal. Batista defeats Jeff Hardy and Elijah Burke. And then there's a battle royal, which Team Raw wins. But the draft and the card of this show is entirely forgotten in any wrestling lore that might exist about this show, Mr. McMahon Appreciation Night. In between the show are segments that are WWE legends and celebrities who are paying tribute to Mr. McMahon.
Oh, so it really is people are coming out and saying Vince McMahon touch my butthole, or Vince McMahon.
You sort of hit on what ends up happening, which is the WWE legends sort of come out and or are on the Jumbotron and say mostly negative things about Vince McMahon, which isn't surprising, both because of the reality and because of his character. Like, both are bad people, so it sort of just translates very nicely through, I suppose. But this includes appearances by Jesse Ventura, Snoop Dogg, Mick Foley, Steve-O. Donald Trump makes an appearance on the Jumbotron. Jimmy Snuka and the Iron Sheik. Bret Hart, Bobby Heenan, Roddy Piper does show up in person, comes out, the bagpipe music comes out, and he really rips into Donald Trump. Mark Cuban makes an appearance and says that Vince is proof that the American dream is alive and well.
This must have been a huge event for you as a kid. This is like the history of professional wrestling parading
I'm doing cartwheels. Bob Costas makes an appearance on the Jumbotron. And of course, Bob Costas is somewhat known for his interview with Vince McMahon, I think maybe in the 90s, where he gets under Vince's skin and Vince sort of starts challenging him and giving him the business. And it's this sort of legendary interview you can sort of see. And so Bob Costas, you can kind of see, has that Bob Costas look, like he's just happy to be there. You're like, well, there he is, Bob Costas. Captain Lou Albano makes an appearance, and this was a huge deal for me and my dad in particular.
I can't believe he was still alive at that point.
So my dad, in the late 1980s, Ralph Butler, cut a promo with Captain Lou on Binghamton's local news network. My dad was the two-time winner of Binghamton's Ugliest Bartender contest.
Lol.
Which afforded him an opportunity to raise a lot of money for charity. But one of the things that he won was this opportunity to cut a promo with Captain Lou. Captain Lou, and I'm talking to you. And in the segment, Captain Lou was really sort of promoting a show that he was doing in Binghamton. But then during the segment on the news, he did what in wrestling is called as he put my dad over. So he said, I'm going to beat this guy. Not my dad. He's saying about his opponent tonight. I'm going to kick this guy's butt. But I'll tell you who I would never mess with. That's Ralph right here. This guy, he could mess me up if I. So he really starts talking my dad up. Wow. And my dad starts playing along with the kayfabe of we're going to go along with this. Yeah, you wouldn't want to mess with me. And so when he appears on the Jumbotron, it really is like this parade of history that's occurring. That's a real sort of wonderful thing to see, despite the fact that Mr. McMahon is involved in, all the horrible things that come along with that.
For people who are not pro wrestling fans, you may know Captain Lou Albano as the father in Cyndi Lauper's Girls Just Want to Have Fun music video. So that will date him. He was already a big wrestling star in the early 80s, right?
And I believe he voiced Mario in a cartoon as well.
Oh, it's a Mario.
Yeah.
Okay.
There are also appearances on the Jumbotron of Gene Okerlund and Stone Cold Steve Austin. And then this is one of the sort of content warnings, an appearance by the WWE superstar Ashley, who later took her own life. And in this segment, she talks about Vince McMahon's treatment of the WWE divas, the female superstars. And she talks very critically of the way he has treated the divas, and they play a clip of Vince McMahon making a female superstar bark like a dog, and among a whole reel of just him really treating female performers horribly.
And this is played for laughs, or this feels like half sincere?
Well, it is. It ends up being played for laughs because at the conclusion of that segment, Ashley says, "Here's a gift for you, Vince." And out come the fabulous Moolah and Mae Young, who are two queens of wrestling. And at this point, they are in their 80s, late 80s. In fact, the fabulous Moolah would die a few months after this. And they come out from backstage wearing nightgowns and get on the ground next to a doghouse and start barking. And so it is sort of like some kind of a play for jokes. And here you go, Vince. This is really what you deserve. Some kind of a very strange, and again, in hindsight, because Ashley, had joined a class action lawsuit against the WWE and had clearly maybe, had been abused at the hands of some people in that company.
Wow.
So that gets very heavy.
Hey, May is Mental Health Awareness Month. And the goal isn't just to get people talking about mental health, it's to actually take action and get real support. But when you try to do that, it's still way harder than it should be. A lot of online therapy doesn't accept insurance at all, which means even during a month focused on mental health, you're still stuck paying out of pocket or signing up for an expensive monthly subscription. But Rula does things differently. They partner with over 120 insurance plans, making the average copay just $15 per session. That's real therapy from licensed professionals at a price that actually makes sense. Because the whole point of Mental Health Awareness Month is making sure people actually get help, not just think about it. And Rula sticks with you throughout your entire journey, checking in to make sure your care is actually helping you move forward. Mental Health Awareness Month is a good reminder to finally take that step. And this is one of the easiest ways to actually follow through. No wait lists, no frustrating back and forth. Appointments can be available as soon as tomorrow. So go to rula.com/omnibus to get started today. That's RULA.com/omnibus for quality therapy that's covered by insurance. This Mental Health Awareness Month, don't just think about your mental health. Actually take the step to take care of it. Visit rula.com/omnibus to get started. That's rula.com/omnibus. You deserve mental health care that works with you, not against your budget.
The final person to make an appearance on the Jumbotron is Stone Cold Steve Austin. after Stone Cold makes his appearance and they sort of play the best of clips of Stone Cold and Vince hitting one another, because they were sort of this famous rivalry in the late 90s. It was, Stone Cold represents the working man. Vince is the boss. You get to beat up your boss. People love it. After Stone Cold speaks, Vince McMahon's music hits and his intro video plays on the Jumbotron. And it's now 11 p.m. We're at the end of a 3-hour show. We've watched all the matches, all the draft picks. We've seen all the celebrities and superstars, and out walks Mr. McMahon, who usually has this very big walk. I would describe it as if man-spreading could walk. He just sort of throws his whole body in every direction. But when he walks out tonight at 11 p.m. on Mr. McMahon Appreciation Night, he has his hands sort of clasped in front of him, and he's walking out very gingerly, very slowly, which is it's just very strange. On the broadcast, Jim Ross says that Vince appears sedated. This is the commentator. Oh. And Jerry the King Lawler, who sort of represents the heels, said, no, he seems calm. So they're sort of playing off each other. He walks down and he gets into the ring very slowly. He stands in the ring and he just starts looking around with this sort of 1,000-yard stare. And someone comes into the ring, hands him a microphone. He holds the microphone up to his mouth. He sort of mutters something that we in the audience can't hear. You can't hear at home either. And he just sort of slowly puts the microphone back down to his side, and then he drops it. And this begins a sequence of what's like 6 minutes of sort of dead air, both on the broadcast and in the audience. It's very strange. He just slowly turns and walks out of the ring. He just walks down the ramp and goes back towards the backstage area. The crowd is booing him, profusely the whole time. We're booing him. You suck, boo, right? And he just seems entirely dejected and very, very feeble, very timid, and it's strange. So he walks all the way back up the entrance ramp, does one sort of last turn around, looks at the arena. We give him another big round of boos, and walks backstage. When he walks backstage, the camera cuts to him walking backstage. And so in the arena, the Jumbotron cuts to him walking into the backstage area. And all of the WWE superstars are lined up for some reason. Very strange. Mm-hmm. And he just slowly walks through the WWE roster.
It's a gauntlet. They're on either side.
They're just, yeah. They're on both sides, and he's just slowly walking. Everyone's looking at him, kind of like they all kind of have somber looks, except for one wrestler, Paul London, who has a big smile on his face, and he got in trouble for that. he was not supposed to have a smile. But that is a meme now, of course. He walks by Hacksaw Jim Duggan, which makes the whole crowd go, oh, because that's what you do when you see Hacksaw. And that kind of happens a few times. There's a few people you see. And again, this is a very drawn out thing that happens, and he kind of walks, and then someone comes up to him and says, sir, your limousine's this way. And he turns around and he slowly walks out, and he walks to the back of the arena, pushes the door open and walks out of the arena. And then it out cuts to a camera that's outside of the arena, and it shows him kind of walk, and he looks around. There's two people sitting on a garbage can, and he looks sort of at his limousine, and he walks over, he puts his hand on the door. He kind of pauses for a second. He opens the door. He steps in. You can see he pops his foot back out of the limousine. Then he pulls his foot in, and he shuts his door, and the limousine explodes.
The limousine explodes?
The limousine explodes. And on the broadcast, it just ends. There's nothing. It just, fades to black. And ironically, the night before, June 10th, was the final episode of The Sopranos, so it was very interestingly timed. But it just goes to black. And in the arena, typically when a WWE show ends, they give the audience kind of one more thing, just to kind of make you go home happy. That's the idea. There's none of that. They do not have any announcement. There's no additional show. It just ends.
The lights come up, and then you're all just stunned and...
And I never thought it was real. I go, what the heck? Still though, you're like, what the heck? Did he just explode?
And was there like a visible cut?
Very no clear cut. Obviously, it was filmed the night before, and it was cut together in some way, spliced together. But reportedly, there were people in the audience. We were all sort of stunned and just kind of walked around and went out. Reportedly, some people did call the police to report that Vince McMahon had exploded.
Sure.
Reportedly, people watching the broadcast called the Wilkes-Barre police to let them know, there had been a car bombing.
Sure, that checks out.
When me, my dad, and my friend walked out of the arena, sure enough, there was a smoldering limousine with the fire department tending to it.
Oh my God, brilliant. Whoever stage managed this, I hope they got an Emmy Award.
And so my friend's like, I guess maybe a little more susceptible than I am. He was like, he's not really dead, is he? I'm like, no, we know he's not dead. I don't know how they're going to get out of this, but no, he's not dead. So, very strange. I mean, we have an hour and a half ride back to Binghamton, and we just witnessed this very strange thing. There was no big ending. He exploded. And we're kind of like in silence.
Now Nick, do you ever fantasize? I mean, you're a young guy, so you probably don't have as much to run from as a lot of people as they get older. A lot of decisions that they wish they could just, like punch out. But does it occur to you, or did it occur to you, and is there any part of you that thinks in that moment, if you were Vince McMahon, that you really would just take your money and just disappear, like use this as a moment to just be like, peace out?
John, me personally, yeah, I'm sort of stunned by some of the wealth people have, because I would have stopped 10 times before I ever got to that amount.
100%. Like at the point that you have even $10 million, it feels like, you know what? That's plenty. Like,
what are they doing? I don't like.
Why keep showing up? You just are embarrassing yourself. But at this moment, like, he's a very wealthy man. Yep. This is a plausible exit. You could just move to, I mean, in his case, move to some mansion in the Ozarks or I don't know.
And as we know by the federal sex trafficking case that he's now under investigation, if he had stopped, then maybe he would have been better off if he had tried to connect with something more in the world than the dollars in his pocket.
But I'm guessing that's not what happened.
That's not what happened. So the next day, WWE.com was updated as a memorial to Mr. McMahon. There was a video of what was purported to be a federal investigation. Federal investigators saying we're looking into a car bombing with one deceased individual. It's often reported when people talk about this story that WWE stock fell the next day. It was a publicly traded company. And it did fell about 2%. I don't know that I would chalk that up to the stock market thinking Mr. McMahon was dead. Right. Now the question is, what are they going to do? I mean, they are clearly portraying this as his character is dead. The local police in Wilkes-Barre put out a statement, again, clarifying that this was a stunt and no one is injured. And the storyline
buzzkill local Wilkes-Barre police.
The storyline continues over the next week as they do the tolling of 10 bells on SmackDown for Vince McMahon. They have an image of him up and they ring the wrestling bell 10 times in his memory, which is, again, kind of a slap in the face to actual wrestlers who have passed away during their time with the company, of which there are numerous who both have received that honor and who have not received that honor.
So the 10 bells is like a wrestling tradition for those who have passed away?
Yep, often unexpectedly or a legend. Yeah, they'll be honored with sort of this tolling of 10 bells. And by all accounts, what WWE is set up to do is start a whodunit storyline. And they were going to look
and it could have been anybody because they all had a reason.
They all had a motive. And in fact, on the next episode of Monday Night Raw, there's wrestlers who start kind of accusing one another, and they're starting to go down this path. A week following that, so now towards the end of June, there's a pay-per-view, Vengeance, and one of the wrestlers scheduled to compete at Vengeance was Chris Benoit, and Chris Benoit did not show up for Vengeance. 14-year-old Nick at the time was very interested on the behind the scenes of professional wrestling, right? Like looking under the veil. And so I was curious why Chris Benoit didn't attend. And I was looking at Sunday and into the Monday, trying to figure out what was happening by looking at professional wrestling websites and, of course, Yahoo Messenger chat rooms, which were a thing at the time to keep track of goings on in the world and in the world of wrestling. The next day, it starts to emerge that Chris Benoit and his family are dead. So he is dead, his wife is dead, and his child is dead.
Really dead? Actually dead?
They're actually dead. And so Monday Night Raw that night is canceled, and the show begins with Vince McMahon in the middle of the ring to an empty arena saying, "Tonight was supposed to be about the demise of my character, but in reality, we are facing a real tragedy. Chris Benoit and his family are dead, and so this show has been canceled, and it will be a tribute to Chris Benoit."
To those who are trying to Google this story, it's not Crispin Waugh, W-A, because that is actually a musician. There's a musician named Crispin Waugh. This is Chris Benoit.
That's right.
Which is a French name, Benoit.
That's right.
And this is an actual murder-suicide.
Yes, as the episode is airing, Monday Night Raw, sort of, it's 8:30, it's in the middle of the episode. It becomes clear that this was not just a tragedy where they'd all died, carbon monoxide poison, or something like that. That, as you said, this was a murder-suicide situation where Chris Benoit, likely as a result of CTE-type injuries and potential steroid abuse, had committed this horrible crime and taken his own life. And that emerged while they're airing a tribute to him.
And so he was scheduled to be like the centerpiece of a wrestling match, and the night before instead killed his family and himself?
Yes, that appears to be the case. And the show ends, Monday Night Raw ends, and the next night is ECW. And it starts once again with Vince McMahon, and he acknowledges that the tragedy was sort of worse than first imagined. And that episode of ECW is kind of really the last time for a very long time that WWE talks about Chris Benoit. They did what they've done with other superstars in the past who have gone through controversy, including people like Hulk Hogan, who said the N-word and had a lot of controversy around him. They sort of scrub them from the history. Oftentimes they will bring them back at some point, or at least bring their image back at some point and talk about them again. But for the most part, Chris Benoit has sort of just been removed from the pantheon of wrestling.
And does anyone have any sense, you must, what Vince McMahon's actual plan was, what his story was meant to be if it weren't for this?
Yeah, this is much debated. The question, the question is who killed him, who had motive. It was the real whodunit of, why was the character Mr. McMahon killed? What did they have to gain? There are some storylines that potentially had to do with him having an illegitimate son who was going to try to come and take over the company. Potentially there was a storyline where his real life brother was going to be involved in some capacity. Obviously those did not play out.
They must have invested a lot of money in setting this up only to have it just need to evaporate.
Yeah, and then they just moved on. I mean, it did just evaporate. Eventually, I don't know if it was a few weeks or months later, but the Mr. McMahon character kind of disappeared for a while. He just was off television for a while, and they just moved on. And eventually he comes back and basically says, oh, by the way, the limousine explosion, that was just to see who cared about me. I sort of staged it myself, and I wanted to see who would really, miss me if I was gone. and then WWE very similarly, that's sort of gone. Like this event, this limousine explosion, really this period of time in wrestling, 2007 is a very strange period of professional wrestling, in this era between, the Attitude Era and the PG era. You got this snuggled in between where they're kind of in between both and not quite sure what to do.
Wow. And how long was it possible that the Crispin Benoit story was also kayfabe? Like, did that get, did that have any time in the wrestling community, or was that pretty much dispelled right away?
Dispelled pretty quickly. Again, their conspiracies did somewhat emerge about what WWE knew and maybe when they knew it. Specifically, there was an instance where the Wikipedia page for Chris Benoit was updated on Sunday night, indicating that he had done this from apparently a computer in Stamford, Connecticut, where WWE headquarters is. Obviously is always, I thought that's sort of strange. But otherwise, most people knew this was horrific. And Chris Benoit was at the top of his game in many ways at this time. He was just recently the world heavyweight champion, and had been the ECW champion as well, I believe, or maybe was on track to become the ECW champion. So it was just really treated as this horrific tragedy. And I mean, this was probably, for 14-year-old Nick Butler, that'll take you out of it pretty quickly.
Wow.
I think it was right around that period of time where I would have started my transition from wrestling to politics. Unfortunately, I've been chased since.
barely a transition, it turns out.
Yeah.
So you do credit this with the kind of moment where you were like, you know what, this is all too much. I think I'm gonna.
I think it really was kind of the start of that. I mean, it was clear that that was a horrific tragedy, and it was just sort of clear that Chris Benoit's finishing move was a flying headbutt. He would jump down and sort of frog splash, while arms wide open, headbutt first onto the ring. And that'll do damage over time, whether you're trying to really hit someone else in the head or not with your head. You're going to hit them sometimes, and you're taking bumps throughout the match. And again, sort of certainly the steroid use and the performance enhancing drug abuse that was happening in professional wrestling at the time. And I was old enough. I guess I was old enough at that point to sort of go, well, I don't know about this. Like, you can suspend disbelief a fair amount, but I found it harder to do. Which I would say is terrible, because as I have mentioned, professional wrestling can be a great outlet for emotions, for storytelling, for creativity, for inclusion, for community. I very much found all those things in this, despite Mr. McMahon, and I should say Vince McMahon, the person. I was able to find the community aspect of it and find. That was my strange outlet as a child. People have comics and all different interests, and mine was professional wrestling at the time.
And so it's been almost 20 years, and it sounds like it was in the subsequent 20 years that Vince McMahon continued to become more and more erratic, and also just like are the revelations about him, do they all predate this? Are these revelations that are like this, he's been like this for 40 years? Or did he get worse and worse? Was he more and more abusive?
Yeah, unfortunately, it's a yes and situation. By all accounts, it does appear to both predate and then also ramp up during this period of time. The hush money payments nearly $20 million in hush money payments was from 2006 to 2022. So it was pretty largely after this period of time that's occurring. Yes, he kept flying as close to the sun as possible in terms of being a bad person. And it is sort of one of those things, and into adulthood, and certainly through the, what we think of as the Me Too era. I mean, it was sort of this long period of time in the late 2010s where it was sort of shocking to me that Vince McMahon was escaping accountability. It seems like such a prime. It just was so obvious and so well documented and reported by that point that it was shocking that the tide hadn't turned on it. But it has, really here in the last, I think, 5 years, it really has started to shift. He backed away from the company. He ultimately sold the company to, I think, TKO, which is a UFC company. And that's, where he got most of his wealth that he has today. John, it is, I will say, strange as someone who grew up a wrestling fan, who then went into the world of politics, to see how this has all started to amalgamate into one horrific kind of like, we're all observing it, knowing it's broken, but very, very few people, I shouldn't say it, many people breaking through that sound barrier to say what's really happening. But the institutional support, when you do that, is not quite there yet. You do end up taking a hit.
Well, there's always been a clear difference between the editorial page and the front page. And although I agree, and it's been shocking to the degree that the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal will report straight-facedly things that are clearly lies, or they will take on at face value, or appear to be reporting at face value, things that strain credulity. The idea that the news media still has the capacity for there to be an objective voice is something that, if once you abandon it, there's no recapturing it, right? And so if every reporter is an editorial reporter, so there is a lot of collateral damage from the New York Times saying, like, well, the Trump administration claims that bats are flying out of his opponent's butt, where the rest of us look and go, come on, like, stand, right. Speak truth to power here. I think there is a credible explanation for why media institutions in particular would be struggling to and striving to maintain some, at least the appearance of, and not just the appearance of, but actually the structural ability to claim to be reporting the news objectively. And whether or not that will survive the next 5 years, whether or not in the aftermath of this era we can reclaim some of that ground and say, there always has been an independent media voice. And I think part of the contemporary problem is that even people who should be supporting the idea of there being objective reality have also abandoned the premise of objective reality. And if both the right and the left are claiming that there is no truth, that it's all bias in one form or another, it makes it very much more difficult to claim that there's even science, let alone that there is any kind of, reality, as you have said many times, that we could all return to one day.
Yeah, and certainly the fracturing of the media environment, the use of algorithms has made all of this much more difficult. It does seem that we are all in sort of segmented realities in terms of how we understand what is happening. And unfortunately, it appears that I think a lot of this is going to come down to us as a citizenry. Are we educated? Are we aware? Are we, as educated voters, able to break through past, this moment in history and potentially start to restore some sort of sense of a shared purpose, either as a nation or as a people, and a shared moral framework that we can at least understand and have conversations with one another. My sense is when I have conversations with anyone who is in MAGA world, often they are very nice conversations, because I do not go into those conversations with I don't want to change a mind. I want to get to know that person. And often, I mean, it is a source, again, just like the WWE, it is a source of community, that these are people who have found a community in that space. And so that is how they are approaching it, largely, less than maybe an ideological position that they've ended up in. So it's a very difficult balance. And, my sense is we potentially need more content that just, more entertaining content. That exists outside of the MAGA kayfabe world, or outside of even the day-to-day. And so I think of The Onion acquiring InfoWars and bringing on Tim Heidecker to be a part of that potentially. I think of things like alternate reality games, which can be immersive ways to experience storytelling. Things like D&D, like ways just for us to reconnect outside of the political sphere, and potentially have conversations that are not grounded in, for some reason, this guy we've been talking about now. I think we're all very, very tired of talking about, a certain way of thinking. And there are ways to start to do that. There are people who have talked about this. I'd shout out Douglas Rushkoff, and Grant Morrison, the comic book artist, had a conversation about this. Sort of how do we start to create a different reality, one that isn't controlled by these strange tech billionaires? And then I want to mention the Irish satirist and musician, Blind Boy Boat Club, who has talked at length sort of about professional wrestling and kayfabe and how it's been utilized by politicians as well. So there are people who have been talking about this, and it's just one framework potentially to understand one or two ways that it hooks you in, and you think, I could write it better if I just could get there, I could do it. But they keep zigging when I zag, So it is this difficult balance for sure.
It's a lot harder to be self-reflective, and so often I feel that my audience primarily identifies as smart people and thoughtful people, but so often they don't detect the kayfabe of their own world of perception, because we all do. There are lots of echo chambers now.
Oh yeah,
they aren't just echo chambers that believe that that Democrats are drinking the blood of children. There are echo chambers that are much more sophisticated. And we've always looked at wrestling and said, it's ridiculous. And, oh my God, I can't believe it that those people don't understand it's fake. When, in fact, that mentality is also a form of echo chamber, because all of the things that you look at and say, oh, well, but my world is completely authentic, and the people that talk to me and their conclusions
it positions you above them. You look down and you look up, and they look up, right. You look down. We're all sort of shifting around.
Even as someone who works in higher education, that universities, that academics, that PhD programs also are subject to and susceptible to mythoses that are self-serving, and that ultimately, lead to people out in the world saying, I'm one of the smart ones and I understand the truth and the reality. And they aren't, in a lot of cases, they are capable of self-reflection. It just doesn't occur to them that they need to challenge their presuppositions. So I feel like there are a lot of people in our world that, it's an easy target to say, these hillbillies that believe that Vince McMahon's limo exploded are a bunch of dingalings. But of course, we who are, convinced that that there are these other conspiracies where all of the media are in service of arms corporations, are also not doing they're also, it's very easy for us to also be culpable. And not.
It turns out it's very nuanced, but unfortunately, the people that take the big swings and explain it all with a nice package, they do a pretty good job of bundling it up so you'll take it.
Well, it's
John,
nice thing about Omnibus, because this is an hour and a half long show, and so it isn't just a TikTok video.
That's right. And I want to end with a hero. I think we need a hero in this story. And the hero is hardcore legend Mick Foley. Mick Foley, at the time that the Mr. McMahon Appreciation Night was happening and the storyline was being planned for the limousine to explode, he opposed the storyline and said that it could be troubling for WWE's veteran fans, who at the time and throughout today there are a large contingent of veterans who are fans, as well as children who maybe don't understand what they're watching and they're going to watch a limousine explode, that it could be troubling.
Did he have authority within the organization or was
no
he
authority? He just vocalized it, and then he was one of the legends who came out and just lit into Vince McMahon that night, said, Vince McMahon has no friends. Are you Vince McMahon's friend? I'm not Vince McMahon's friend. No one's Vince McMahon's friend. So Mick Foley said, enough's enough. I'm done with this. I am not renewing my Legends contract, and walked away from the company. And John, I think really it's important that we don't let this omnibus entry distract us from the fact that in 1998, The Undertaker threw Mankind off Hell in a Cell and plummeted 15 feet through an announcer's table.
No, that really is the takeaway. That is what we should all carry from this episode. Also, what is the kayfabe on Linda McMahon actually being estranged from Vic McMahon?
My sense is if you have you're married to someone $3 billion, you might not go far. I really don't know. We can guess forever. That's the fun of it, isn't it? It's how they get you.
Yeah, it's the Marvel Comics universe, except
that's right,
except real. Well, Nick, thank you for being on the show, and thank you for entering the death of Mr. McMahon into the omnibus.
It's been a pleasure.
And that concludes the death of Mr. McMahon. Entry 319.MA0605. Certificate number 44697 in the omnibus. Futurelings, it's key, I think, for you to avoid social media and the internet. And I think you should go to thrift stores and buy CDs and VHS tapes and books and typewriters and live in your homes and only allow yourselves 3 hours a day of electricity.
Sure.
We should gradually contract from the larger world and focus our energy on local communities where we meet each other in person and talk, and maybe a little bit of spouse swapping. I think is there's an eternal value in that. But if you are going to continue to be on the internet, I want to encourage you to spend only time with other futurelings when you hang out in a very few number of places, including anywhere futurelings congregate, on Facebook, on Reddit, on Discord. Nick, are any of these places that you show up?
Sure. I have spent time on the subreddit and on the Facebook page and the Patreon as well.
Oh, that's good. And so you mentioned the Patreon. That is a place you can support the show. Also, there is a form of addenda to the show, which is the get to know our co-host like micro episode or mini episode. Nick and I had a great conversation that kind of went into greater depth about his backstory. And that is available at patreon.com/omnibus project. You can submit a show, as Nick did, by going to omnibusproject.com/submit and writing up a show proposal. You can actually watch this show on YouTube at youtube.com/@theomnibusproject. And I think, Nick's very handsome. You can see the typewriter in the background. I don't
know. My dad always said I had a face for radio.
Well, but at one point, it was just in the Patreon episode that your cat makes an appearance, right?
That's true. Yes.
Okay. So that's another reason to sign up. And you can send us packages and we'll open them on air on the other addenda program that we do once a month where we read viewer mail. Send those packages care of the Omnibus Project to 609 Southwest 150th Street, number 48084, Burien, Washington. That's Burien, 98166-9998.
Futurelings, from our vantage point in your distant past, we have no idea how long our civilization survived. We hope and pray that the catastrophe we fear may never come. If the worst comes soon, this recording, like all our recordings, may have been our final word. But if Providence allows, we wish you many good cheeses and hope to be back with you soon for another entry in the Omnibus.